Fame, glory, recognition. This is what awaits you in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door's Glitz Pit. This is probably the most prolific, the most popular chapter in the entire game. It is universally beloved for its intersection of non-stop action and goosebump-inducing mystery, and has some of the most iconic and memorable characters in the entire Paper Mario series. At the story's conclusion, you are recognized by friends, foes, and champion alike for your accomplishments and leave a hero. This is Twilight Town, a dreary little village dwarfed in size by the Glitz Pit. No one is particularly notable or stands out, and they concern themselves little with Mario's arrival. The villain is a cowardly pushover, a wimp, a bratty smartmouth, and the entire chapter is riddled with backtracking. In the original release, you travel back and forth between the town and Creepy Steeple a total of 5 times throughout the same claustrophobic forest. To say this chapter is divisive would be an understatement. It has its fans, of course, but more often than not, it's more of a love it or hate it kind of chapter. But what if I told you that Chapter 4, For Pigs the Bell Tolls, holds the richest Mario story ever told? A story not just exceptional by Mario standards, but by any and all standards. A story that is informed and reinforced deeply by the gameplay. A story absolutely packed with allegorical subtext and compelling themes. High praise, I know. So now it's time to put my money where my mouth is. Welcome to Twilight Town. By the way, if it wasn't obvious, this isn't a review of the full game. One day maybe, but I have so much to talk about with regards to this chapter that any full review I eventually did of this game would come to a screeching halt once I got to Chapter 4. It would absolutely kill the pacing. So, might as well talk about it now. This video also assumes that you've played this game before or have at least some knowledge of its events. Before I can get into the juicy bits like theming and subtext, let's get the overt text out of the way by going over the events of this chapter's story first. If you'd like to skip this section, you can go to the timestamp shown on screen now. The chapter opens with Mario's arrival to Twilight Town. Just kidding. It actually starts here, the warp pipe that rejects your initial entry. In order to be allowed in, you need to find this character, Darkly, who informs you that in order to enter Twilight Town, you have to have something with your name written on it. This is actually important for both gameplay and narrative reasons that I will circle back to when it becomes relevant. Once you actually enter Twilight Town, you're welcomed by a townsperson right before the bell rings, and he's turned into a pig. For pigs, the bell tolls. You're told by the mayor of the town that there is a monster living in the Creepy Steeple, who indiscriminately turns the townsfolk into pigs whenever he rings the bell at the top of the tower, and this monster is in possession of the crystal star that Mario is looking for. It isn't said overtly, but it can be assumed that the crystal star is giving the monster the power to turn people into pigs. The ruby star power is called Art Attack. Art allows you to create or to amend things that already exist according to the whims of the artist, so it's fitting it would provide this kind of ability to the wielder. Though the mayor insists Mario leaves the town for his own safety and deems it unthinkable that Mario would go to Creepy Steeple, Mario decides of course to go anyway. The gate guardian does not allow Mario to leave without the express permission of the mayor, so Mario doubles back to the mayor's house to do just that. Along the way, the bell rings. The party fears they may be turned but are thankful to be unaffected. Entering the mayor's house reveals that he was the one to be turned. For pigs, the bell tolls. Optionally, if you enter this woman's home, she'll inform you that she doesn't have the money to feed her children. After giving her some food, she says thank you, happy that she can take care of her children, before the bell rings again and she is turned into a pig in an honestly brutal moment, leaving the children alone. For pigs, the bell tolls. With no other option, the group heads back to the gate and the bell rings again. This time, the gate guard is turned into a pig. For pigs, the bell tolls. With no one to stop them, the party heads into the forest. Kind of strange that Mario allowed the gate guard to stop them in the first place when he is perfectly willing to beat up the gate guards in Rogueport, but that's fine. I guess Mario doesn't want to beat up good people. That's not who he is after all. There are some puzzles along the forest path to the Creepy Steeple, but for the most part it's a very narrow singular path with enemies waiting for you. The lack of space to maneuver, the limited visibility courtesy of trees in the foreground, and this slit here that requires you to enter paper mode to progress basically guarantees an encounter with at least some enemies. More if you're unlucky. Though these enemies can hit decently hard, it's nothing Mario and his partners can't handle, so the danger level is relatively low. At last, you arrive at the creepy Steeple, a large but almost completely empty mansion. There's some basic puzzles in a room you cannot enter, alongside a box of 200 boos that give you a reward if you tell this boo just how many of them emerge from the box. These boos then hang around the main lobby. If you stand still for too long, they'll kick you out of the mansion, but if you keep moving, they won't succeed. There is an optional mini-boss if you choose to allow the boos to latch on but swat them away with hammer spins repeatedly. Notably, they did give this boss, Atomic Boo, his own theme in the remake. Very nice of them to do. But none of this is what Mario was here for. Ascending the spiral staircase toward the top of the tower leads you to the ever-present tolling bell, with a creature sitting on a chair looking quite pleased with himself, watching TV and considering what pranks he wants to pull. I considered keeping in theme with the story by not saying his name until it's discovered, but for simplicity's sake, I'll just get it out of the way. This is Dupless. You can take his name in multiple ways. His name is very similar to the word duplicity, meaning double. You can also read the dupe part of his name as either dupe, as in to trick someone, or as a short form of the word duplicate, meaning to copy or recreate something. In most languages other than English, he has some variation of the name Rumpel, short for Rumpelstiltskin. All interpretations or references in his name have at least some merit, as we'll soon come to find out. Mario, of course, wants to help the town and needs the Crystal Star for his adventure, so the battle begins. Dupless has a measly 40 HP and 4 attack. Most of its attacks are very straightforward and not at all threatening. Compared to Macho Grubba, who had 60 HP and the same attack power, but had multiple ways to buff up his attack, defense, evasion, and even giving himself multiple attacks per turn, Dupless is a paperweight by comparison, pardon the pun. Notably, the Dupless boss theme contains the sound of a tolling bell in the background. I wonder who's going to be transformed this time. When Dupless is reduced to half of his health, he copies Mario's appearance as a purple shadow, but doesn't become any more impressive in terms of his attack or defense. The player is probably expecting some kind of twist, a scripted sequence to swoop in and save Dupless at the last second, but it never comes, and he goes down in only a handful of turns. Defeated, the party takes the star with all of the usual flair and fanfare, although Mario looks a little more tired than usual. Mario and his friends take the star back down the stairs, leaving the defeated Shadow on the ground. At this point, the player is likely underwhelmed by how easy the chapter was, but is expecting a fade out to the next Peach interlude. But the screen stays still. Growing impatient, the player will be compelled to start clicking buttons on their controller. As soon as the A button is pressed, the Shadow on the ground leaps into action, and the player is given control. For pigs, the bell tolls. This is when the realization hits. Dupless has just stolen Mario's body and made off with it, alongside the Ruby Star and all of your friends in tow. This is your twist. You didn't realize it when it happened, but it was at precisely this moment that Dupless takes Mario's body, where Mario was confused saying, "Wait, I lost?" With nowhere to go, you decide to go back to Twilight Town. Now, the narrow paths filled with enemies that once served to be a mild nuisance have turned into a harrowing death trap. Without partners to back him up, Mario is significantly more vulnerable if he's forced into a battle and unable to flee. Cut to the Shadow Sirens in Twilight Town. This is an antagonist group in pursuit of Mario, hoping to get his crystal stars and the treasure map in his possession. Beldum, Marilyn, and Vivian have prepared a super weapon to assist them in defeating Mario, but have lost it. Though it's Beldum who misplaces it, Vivian is the one to take the blame, and is tasked with the chore of rummaging through the bushes to look for it. All while Marilyn and Beldum leave to go laze about while she does all the work. As Mario arrives at the gate of Twilight Town, Dupless appears, still wearing his skin. He offers Mario a deal. If he can successfully guess his name, he'll give Mario his body back. The issue is, even if you know Dupless's name already, the lowercase p is missing from the alphabet. He's rigged this game so he cannot lose. With no other options, Mario flees into Twilight Town. The pig curse has seemingly been lifted, with everyone praising Mario for his efforts, not knowing just how dire the situation actually is. Even the mayor is hosting Dupless and the rest of your partners to celebrate. You're not even able to leave town in this form, because your body that is wearing the overalls with Mario's name on it is currently in possession of Dupless. And since Mario can't speak his own name due to Dupless's magic, he couldn't even ask someone else to write his name down on him again if he tried. Eventually, Mario bumps into Vivian. Though Vivian at this point is Mario's enemy, it's pretty difficult to not feel bad to see someone as sweet as Vivian cry. So, he finds the weapon for Vivian to make her feel better. Unfortunately, the weapon is broken, but Vivian seems to be okay with that. She's more interested in this stranger who went out of their way to do something kind for her. She confides in Mario about her bullying at the hands of her sisters, implying pretty heavily that there is an undertone of transphobia in their mistreatment of her. Yes, Vivian is trans, and yes, this is actually really important, and we will circle back to it later. Mario confides in her that his name and body were stolen. Deciding to return the favor for Mario's earlier kindness, Vivian joins Mario on his quest to get his name and body back, not quite putting together who Mario actually is. Her ability allows Mario to understand the language of birds, and they use this power to discover that Dupless hides the key to his true name underneath the creepy steeple. With Vivian in tow, the path back is a bit easier, and Mario is able to access rooms in the tower previously inaccessible. Particularly this room with a parrot who knows Dupless's name, and a chest containing the missing lowercase p. Armed with what they need, they head back to confront Dupless. In the original, this requires backtracking through the forest again, but in the remake you gain access at this point to a warp pipe that allows quick travel between the Steeple and Twilight Town. Upon your return to Twilight Town, you confront Dupless, tell him his real name, and he panics, fleeing back to his domain. Giving chase, you eventually confront him for the true final battle. While Dupless isn't much stronger than he was the first go-around, he's got a secret weapon, your old party members. They vow to back up Dupless, calling him Mario, and this allows Vivian to realize that the shadow she's been helping is Mario, her enemy. Feeling foolish, she leaves the party temporarily, leaving Mario to fend for himself. This may have still been doable, but much more challenging. It would essentially be the same boss fight as the initial battle, but with the party members swapped to the other side. Thankfully, after a small while, Vivian decides she doesn't want to be with the Shadow Sirens anymore, and rejoins Mario to assist him. Together, they lay the smackdown on Dupless. With the Faker defeated and exposed, he surrenders the Crystal Star and retreats, granting Mario his body back, and the hard-fought Ruby Star is in Mario's possession. Thus concludes, "For pigs, the bell tolls." This is a relatively simple chapter at first glance. While the plot twist is novel, the events are straightforward. You think you've beaten the boss before having the rug pulled out from under you. You then team up with an unlikely ally to bring the villain down for good. Seems pretty straightforward. However, every facet of this story is tied together brilliantly through one core central theme: identity. The concept of identity is all over this chapter. The literal event of Mario's identity being stolen and eventually needing to be reclaimed overlaps multiple times with the metaphorical concept of the self, of knowing who you are as an individual. This creates more depth in the story of this chapter than just the literal events that are occurring. To provide an example, the reason you love Jurassic Park isn't because of the dinosaurs. I mean, yes, the dinosaurs are awesome, and the visuals at the time were revolutionary and likely had a huge impact on its box office success, but it's not the reason that movie is so beloved decades later. Otherwise, Disney's Dinosaur, another dinosaur movie with excellent visuals which also pioneered the way animated films were developed, would receive similar acclaim, but that's just not the case. Dinosaur is a fine movie, I actually personally like it, but there's not much going on in the film subtextually. It's an extremely direct, simple story. Jurassic Park, on the other hand, while selling you the idea that it's about a theme park filled with dinosaurs, is actually about themes like parenthood. At the start of the film, it's revealed that Ellie wants children, but Alan is hesitant. So, when they are later marveling at a newborn baby dinosaur in a lab, it evokes the question about Alan and Ellie's readiness to become parents. That is subtext. The point is that Jurassic Park is fundamentally a human story that has been given a science fiction fantasy coat of paint. This chapter does something similar with the concept of identity. Before you can even enter Twilight Town, you must write your name down somewhere on yourself. In other words, you must declare, "This is me." It's no accident that this chapter follows the Glitz Pit, where Mario picked up endless fame and fortune under the alias Gonzalez just for that title, or identity, among his other achievements, to be robbed from him along with his body. The villagers don't have much visual variety, some even look like zombies, what with characters like the mayor having parts of his brain open. In general, many of the villagers have the appearance of being stuffed like dolls or scarecrows, but upon actually speaking with them, they're just ordinary people. It's all about showing willingness to engage with them and see the humanity within. Dupless doesn't respect the villagers of Twilight Town. He sees them all as depressing people with no thought to who they are as individuals, and so he dismissively paints them all with the same brush, literally turning them into pigs that are indistinguishable from each other to match how he sees them. It's notable that Dupless also doesn't really have an identity of his own. He's perfectly content to steal the identity of another person, and does so while completely robbing them of any agency in the process. Dupless purposefully hides his identity from others and uses it as a weapon, and fittingly, you never actually get to see Dupless's true face. He's forever draped under that blanket of his. I mentioned earlier that his name in most translations is a reference to Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin is a tale about an imp who hides his name while taking advantage of people and makes a deal with a woman to let her go if she can guess his name. Sound familiar? Dupless's preference to hide his identity while disrespecting the identities of others is why he is not just Mario's physical enemy, but the antithesis of the theme of the whole chapter. He is a superb villain as a result, and the fact that he is so pitiful in combat does an excellent job of disarming the player right before they're shown just how dangerous he truly is. But of course, the most prevalent example of this theme is This is just as much Vivian's story as it is Mario's. So let me get the obvious out of the way. Vivian is trans, which of course plays hugely into the themes we've already discussed. This was something that, while preserved in many translations, was omitted in the original English translation, but was restored for the remake. Let me preface this before I continue. I don't want to lend credence to the false idea that in order for a minority such as a trans person to be in a story, it has to be strictly relevant to that story. Oftentimes, such a decision is as arbitrary as whether a character has black or brown hair. Sometimes a writer just felt like having a character with certain traits in their story. A trans person needs no justification to exist, they just do. And yet we expect explanations for their inclusion in our stories. We treat cis heterosexual existence as the norm and therefore not being held to the same scrutiny. This is a result of our primitive pattern-seeking brains that recognize that most people are cis or heterosexual and assume it is the default position, when no such thing actually exists, especially in the realm of fiction. Free your mind. Now, with that being said, it's funny then that Vivian being trans is actually extremely relevant to the story. While it would be narratively sufficient for Vivian to join Mario because of bullying of an unspecified nature by her sisters, that only satisfies the overt, literal text of the plot. Specifying that Vivian is trans and that such bullying was targeted at Vivian's identity, however, adds depth and subtext. Mario's struggle and Vivian's struggle are exchanging the same ideas. Mario is fighting to get his literal identity back, but Vivian is fighting for a more abstract identity, and it is this that the player resonates with. Until having your perspective changed by Vivian's ability, the birds on these trees are just window dressing. You may not even notice them until they become necessary to get a clue to progress. It is through her eyes that you now recognize these birds as individuals, all with their own quirks, thoughts, personalities, and propensity for gossip. A whole group of individuals that you didn't even recognize as people until you broadened your perspective by accepting Vivian into your family. Gee, wonder if that's a metaphor for something. I mean, yeah, the whole chapter is basically a huge trans allegory. That's why it was equal parts hilarious and annoying to watch some people complain that Nintendo had gone woke, God I hate that term, by making a character trans who wasn't in the GameCube version, ignoring that she was in the Japanese release. It was the opposite. It was regressive to omit that detail from the original English translation, and it was remedied for the remake. Some people even try and dispute Vivian being trans at all. I implore those people. Look at this dialogue. The only thing missing here is giant glowing neon lights and a trans flag waving in the background. How much more overt do you want them to be before you stop living in a state of denial so extreme it would make a flat earther blush? And if Vivian being trans upsets you, then you simply haven't digested the message that this chapter is trying to teach you. Don't be like Dupless, who didn't see the humanity in the villagers of Twilight Town. Instead, be like Mario, who, despite being Vivian's enemy at the time, accepted her for who she is. And, even though incentive shouldn't be necessary to accept people, is rewarded for it because her assistance is essential for the completion of his quest. I have to give props to Nintendo for fixing the translation for the remake and making it extremely clear that Vivian is trans. They could have easily kept the English translation the same as the GameCube release for the sake of preserving the experience people remember to avoid any controversy, but they didn't. As they should, by the way, because the story is much more rich for it. Something else that makes the story richer is the way the gameplay is utilized to enhance the story being told. So now, I'm going to dive into an element of this chapter that is often cited as the reason people don't like it, and explain why it is actually brilliant, and that is the backtracking. Games, in my opinion, are at their best when they utilize game mechanics as a part of their storytelling. For example, diving after Zelda at the end of Tears of the Kingdom. It's not a cutscene, that's you diving down to catch her. The kind of sensations players experience in these instances cannot be appropriately replicated if recreated in another medium such as a movie or a TV show. It has to be experienced personally. In the case of Chapter 4, the Thousand Year Door uses the backtracking between Twilight Town and the creepy Steeple as a narrative tool. Mario will have to make a trip between these locations 5 times. First, he goes to the Steeple. Then, after having his body stolen, goes back to Twilight Town. There, he befriends Vivian and goes back to the Steeple to get Dupless's true name. Then goes back to the village to confront him, and then back to the Steeple for the final battle. While the trips can feel repetitive, it is necessary to the storytelling and tone. On the first trip, Mario is at full power with his party in tow. There are some enemies here, but they aren't anything more dangerous than most of the fights in the Major League in the Glitz Pit. The actual dungeon is extremely short, and then of course there is Dupless himself, who is a total pushover. This entire first trip is built to deliberately underwhelm you before the twist happens. Once Mario's body is stolen, the second trip going back is designed to make the player feel weak and vulnerable. Without any partners, Mario's available actions per turn is cut in half. And he has significantly less effective HP because he cannot share any damage he takes with his partner. This is also why the forest path is so narrow. The game is encouraging these encounters by giving you basically no room to avoid enemies, which forces you to confront just how much weaker you are without your partners. Once you get Vivian to help you, the third trip is designed to instill a newfound sense of relief in the player. At last, you have a partner again, making enemies far less dangerous. She can do damage, use items, and even protect Mario with Shadow Veil. The relief brought by having Vivian around after just experiencing being on your own in this forest endears you to her presence. This also demonstrates how Mario can help Vivian as well, as the basement entrance to the steeple is littered with buzzy beetles, which are enemies immune to fire damage, making them totally immune to Vivian, who only has fire attacks. She helps Mario, and Mario helps her. The final two trips are unfortunately just a victory lap to chase down Dupless, and it is where the backtracking is actually detrimental to the experience. So, in the remake, they added a warp pipe to fast travel between Twilight Town and Creepy Steeple, but it is only available after the third trip, when the narrative significance of the backtracking has already been fulfilled. The availability of this warp pipe was placed perfectly. It avoids a good chunk of the unnecessary backtracking, but if you could access it any sooner, the impact of the forest would have been completely erased. It's necessary for the player to have to physically make those first 3 trips to instill that feeling of first being underwhelmed, then vulnerable, and then empowered. By having to make each trip yourself, you understand and appreciate Mario's state during each trip more. Gameplay and narrative come together to elicit specific feelings in the player. This would not be possible if you could skip the forest for the entire chapter. While the missing lowercase letter P doesn't carry with it such narrative weight as the backtracking through the forest, it is another extremely memorable example of the story being impacted directly by the game mechanics. It's also a very clever solution to prevent players from instantly guessing his name on a repeat playthrough. This is what games are all about, and I think that's really the highest praise I can give to Chapter 4 right there. The story and gameplay come together to provide an extremely unique experience unlike anything we've ever seen in a Mario game, and that's just Chapter 4. While this chapter is, in my view, the most narratively rich of the bunch, other chapters do have overarching themes even if they're executed in a much more simple way or without the same kind of subtext. Chapter 1 is about bravery. Chapter 2 is about community. Chapter 3 is a commentary about consumption and consumerism, and so on. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is an amazing game all around. But this chapter stands head and shoulders above the rest of it in my opinion, and I hope I've done a good job of explaining why Chapter 4, For Pigs the Bell Tolls, is the greatest Mario story ever told. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and a comment if you'd like to share your own interpretation of this chapter's quality or themes. Thank you for watching.